The story could be taken out of today's news. A respected police officer, a devoted husband and father of 3 boys, murders his family with a firearm and then takes his own life. Stunned neighbors describe him as a gentleman cop who was affectionate towards his children. The media publishes photographs of the bodies of his pregnant wife and children being removed from the home. The press reports on the status of the surviving, critically injured child, and then announces his death a few weeks later. The story is covered in all tri-state newspapers, including the New York Times, and reporters uncover an underlying mental illness. The headlines are heartbreaking. Cop kills wife, 2 babies, self in Brooklyn home. Family shot while asleep. 3rd child may die. Wife, 2 sons slain by model cop. Kin hears gunfire, runs into Greenpoint Flat, and finds tragedy. Before bullets ended their lives. The horrific story is one we repeatedly hear today. However, this story is from May 1938, and it involves my family. While researching my genealogy on Ancestry.com, and while waiting on the results of my Ancestry DNA kit, I discovered an 81-year-old family tragedy. It contrasts starkly with the outcome of research that paints a picture of my warm Italian ancestry in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. That picture was devoid of divorce and criminal records. My maternal and paternal ancestors immigrated from Bologna, Calvello, Avellino, Ficorazzi, and Villabata, and I traced 2 lineages back to the early 1500s. I even uncovered 3 births out of wedlock, scandalous during past eras. But the murder-suicide in Brooklyn is the most shocking family secret to surface. Francesco Vitacco, my paternal great-grandfather, immigrated from Calvello, Italy, along with his siblings, to Little Italy in Manhattan in the late 1890s. Francesco and his siblings migrated to then suburban borough of Brooklyn. By the 1930s, one of Francesco's brothers, Giuseppe Joseph Vitacco, and his wife Carmela, owned an elegant 3-story, 6-family home at 224 Kingsland Avenue in Greenpoint, Brooklyn. The couple lived in a flat on the 2nd story. Felicia, their daughter, her husband Benjamin Esposito, and their children lived in a flat on the 3rd story. The couple's older daughter, Antoinette, lived in yet another unit with her family, directly above her parents, on the 3rd story. Antoinette was one of a very few of my paternal ancestors who married a non-Italian man. Born in 1909, she wed Anthony Modleski, the son of Polish immigrants, who served as a New York City traffic officer, 6 years older than she. Since 1926, Modleski worked in the Traffic Squad P on East 67th Street in Manhattan. In 1938, Antoinette was 27 and Anthony was 36. The couple had 3 little boys, Anthony Jr., Joseph, and William. And in the spring of 1938, Antoinette was pregnant with a 4th child. At 5:45 a.m. on Friday, May 13, 1938, yes, Friday the 13th, patrolman Anthony Modleski got out of the bed he shared with his wife and silently smoked a few cigarettes. After crushing a cigarette in an ashtray, he removed his off-duty .32 caliber service revolver from a bureau dresser drawer, released the safety catch, and shot his wife while she slept. He then shot their 1-year-old son William asleep in a crib in the couple's bedroom. Modleski then went into the other bedroom and shot sons Joseph, age 4, and Anthony Jr., age 8. Modleski then went back towards his bedroom, turned the revolver on himself, and fired a fatal bullet into his own head. All were shot at close range in the temple. At 6:10 a.m., Felicia and Benjamin were awakened by the cracks of revolver shots and ran from their flat across the hall to Anthony and Antoinette's flat. The door was locked and there was no response to their pounding. The frantic couple went to Joseph and Carmela's flat, got the key, and entered the Modleski flat through the kitchen. Anthony lay in the hall between the bedrooms in a pool of blood, the revolver at his side. 5 of its 6 cartridges discharged. Antoinette and young Joseph were dead on the scene. Anthony Jr., and William were alive but unresponsive. Hysterical and sobbing, Felicia ran down the street to a store where she called police at the Herbert Street station. The media swarmed outside the brownstone on Kingsland Avenue as police removed the survivors and bodies, snapping photographs that were published in afternoon and evening editions of newspapers under the headline, "Shocked Neighbors Glimpse Dying Infant." Modleski and his 2 sons were taken by ambulance to Greenpoint Hospital. Reverend James Bradley of St. Cecilia's Catholic Church rushed to the hospital to pronounce last rites. Sadly, William died at 7:15 a.m. Modleski also died before ever regaining consciousness. Anthony Jr. was in critical condition, expected by physicians to die. If he survived, he would be blind. Just the previous evening, the Modleski family quietly celebrated William's first birthday at home. No alcohol was served, and the family retired early. According to the media, Assistant District Attorney Ruisi, Deputy Chief Inspector John J. Gallagher, and Inspector Michael F. McDermott investigated and reconstructed the murder-suicide. Inspector Matthew J. McGrath of the Traffic Division described Modleski as very obedient, having a spotless record, a model cop, and popular among fellow officers, but moody. Neighbors described him as a gentleman, courteous, affable, devoted to his family, never known to drink or gamble. The Modleskis were described as a model family by those residing in the mostly Polish-American neighborhood. By no means was Anthony Modleski a monster. A media spectacle. Underlying mental illness. Front-page newspaper spotlighted a portrait of Officer Anthony Modleski in his police uniform, looking handsome and dignified. This community protector had committed horrible acts. Reporters graphically revealed the gruesome details. The newspapers also reported underlying signs of a mental illness in Anthony Modleski. Upon careful reading today, we can surmise that the violent acts were possibly triggered or exacerbated by a recent medical crisis, anesthesia, or related medications, or a combination of multiple factors. 6 weeks prior to the deadly rampage, Modleski complained of stomach pain and underwent an appendectomy. He returned to work a month later to his post on the Brooklyn Bridge. Since the surgery, others described him as nervous, jittery, depressed, gloomy. This tough cop seemed to have bravely expressed concerns about his emotional distress and clearly reached out to many for help.
"The traffic seems to drive me crazy,"
he confided to family. The previous Saturday, Modleski's sister-in-law observed him staring into space while holding an apple from which he had taken a bite. He expressed concern about his salary stretching to support his unplanned child, and asked her to reconsider taking the baby to live with her after it was born. On Tuesday, Modleski sought the counsel of a priest at St. Cecilia's Church. The priest encouraged him to see a doctor. Newspapers reported Modleski was examined by a police surgeon. The day before the murder-suicide, Modleski asked his supervisor to be relieved from his shift after lunch due to worsening symptoms. He was told to go on vacation. Modleski went home. Accompanied by his wife, he went to Dr. Benjamin Kogan, who issued a prescription and placed him on sick leave. The newspapers pointed to Modleski's change in mood and behavior to the time period following his surgery. We aren't told of any issues prior to the surgery. The police official's description of him as moody doesn't have a time period attached. It's not clear if the moodiness predated his decompensation following the surgery. An underlying mood disorder may have been present. The New York Times referenced the murder-suicide as a manifestation of manic-depressive illness, which today is known as the bipolar disorder spectrum. However, the article indicated the onset of symptoms occurred after the recent surgery. The horrendous murder-suicide seems psychotic in nature, but could be related to bipolar disorder with psychotic features. The takeaway is that Anthony Modleski became seriously mentally ill in a matter of 6 weeks. Moreover, there were no mood-stabilizing medications in 1938. It is likely he was prescribed a sedative, possibly a barbiturate, by the physician he saw the day before the tragedy. At the time, pharmaceutical options were limited. The aftermath. On Monday, May 16th, a crowd of 3,000 attended the family's funeral mass, officiated by Monsignor Mogolrick at St. Cecilia's Church. A crowd of 5,000 stood outside to see 3 hearses deliver the caskets to the church, and another 2 cars transporting floral tributes. The entire family was interred at St. John's Cemetery in Middle Village, Queens. Anthony Jr. remained blind and semi-conscious at Greenpoint Hospital as newspapers reported on his condition and published his photos along with his parents' wedding portrait and a photo of Modleski holding his infant son. Upon the boy's death, Dr. Paul Penner described him as a plucky child who won the admiration of the hospital staff. The physician acknowledged the boy's marvelous but hopeless fight. My father was 8 during the massacre on Kingsland Avenue. He lived a few blocks south on Lorimer Street. When I discussed the tragedy with my father, he vaguely remembered the family talking about it, but he was likely shielded from the details. He didn't really know these cousins and had no memories of them. Further research of this nuclear family is far less intense. Antoinette appears in the 1910 and 1920 censuses. Anthony appears in the 1930 census, living with his sister Rose, her husband James Duffy, and their 3 children at 106 and 108 Eagle Street. Antoinette and Anthony's wedding is documented on January 26, 1933. Antoinette and Anthony's children were born too late to appear in the 1930 census and died too young to appear in the 1940 census. Born in 1934, 1935, and 1937, the children would be in their 80s had they lived. They'd be enjoying retirement in Long Island or Florida, golfing, taking cruises, and Skyping with their grandchildren. Processing the discovery. I must confess that I felt relieved that it wasn't a direct bloodline relative who was responsible for the murder-suicide. But as a licensed mental health counselor, I understand Anthony wasn't a monster. He wasn't a criminal. He was experiencing psychosis. I'll never know how Joseph, Carmela, Felice, and the rest of the family processed the complex trauma and enormous grief. I don't know if they understood of mental illness or how the community supported them through the crisis of burying an entire young family, including small children and an unborn baby. I also wonder if anyone residing on that block of Kingsland Avenue today is aware of my relatives' distant footprints on that street or the horrible event that took their lives. My relatives must long be forgotten. Google Maps allows me to see the site where life seems to have moved on. I can even view images of a flat in the building where the murder-suicide may have taken place. It seems to face the street and be on the 3rd floor. Is this the very flat where it all happened? So much of its details appear as it might have looked in 1938. Ancestry.com has taught me the terminology for my filial relationships with these and other relatives. I can tell you that today, my second great uncle and his wife are buried in plots adjacent to Antoinette's and her family. I plan to someday visit and bring flowers to the graves of my first cousin twice removed and her family. I think I'll place teddy bears on the graves of my second cousins once removed.
Midnight were the stars and you. Midnight and a rendezvous. Your eyes held a message tender, saying I surrender all my love to you. Midnight brought us sweet romance. I know all my whole life through I'll be remembering you, whatever else I do. Midnight